just going back to that tragic day in 1985, the Heysel Stadium disaster. I understand you were reporting on it. How were you able to cope reporting on such a surreal event? How did you maintain professionalism? How did you keep your emotions in line, and just how did you keep your tone respectful for something as tragic as that?
I wasn't prepared for it. You can sit down, Ethan. I mean, and maybe because I wasn't prepared for it, it was on local radio, so the jeopardy was nothing like as high as if you are that main TV commentator dealing with 20-odd million people. And actually the BBC made a bit of a mess on it at the night. They came on air. We knew that people, if it was a 7:45 kickoff, the BBC came on air at 7:30. The wall had gone down during the Radio City news programme between 6:30 and 7. And there were confirmed deaths by the time the BBC went on air. And Jimmy Hill just did the same intro. There was no sort of, you've turned on for a football match, but we've got this. And Barry Davies they kind of handed to Barry really, and then Barry had to start talking about it. I'd been at Radio City in Liverpool I went in '77, so I'm not a Scouser, but I'd lived on Merseyside for 8 years. I knew what football meant to the people there, and obviously we had Hillsborough still to come. But I went to Rotterdam 2 weeks earlier. Everton reached the Cup Winners' Cup final, and it was joyous. It was like Everton's first ever major European final. There were like 3 generations of fans there from the same streets as the Liverpool fans. There's no geographical division, no real religious division, if the truth's told. You just either red or blue. Yeah, that's how you're born, kind of. So from the same streets, the same people, and there was a real air of festival about it because it was new to them. 2 weeks later in Brussels, we did a show during the afternoon. It was just 20,000 lads, been here, seen it, done it, got the T-shirt, here we go again. There was just a different feel. There were no granddads, no kids, it was just 20,000 lads. And the stadium was, it was falling down even before they went in. The UEFA cocked up completely. They had all the Juve fans down at one end, and then Liverpool had this open end, and then right in the corner of the same end, but just with a little bit of a fence in between them, were all the tickets they'd sold in Brussels, and they'd nearly all been bought by Italian restaurateurs, and there was predominantly Juventus in the Liverpool end, and not just Juventus, but Juventus guys that just hadn't come to fight, they were just there, they were just Brussels people. And it was very territorial football in the 1980s. Liverpool fans saw black and white in their end, wanted it out. You could pick up rocks off the terracing, it was crumbling. And it was just this awful thing, and they were all trying to get out, and it was right, I can see it now, down in the corner, and they just crushed the wall, and so we were actually live on air. I had Ian St John with me. You know that name, St Greaves? Yeah, very, very famous Scottish and Liverpool international centre forward. And Ian's son was there. He was in the stadium. So Ian's now, he's got a child, his only child is in the stadium. So he's worried for him. We had a guy who sadly is not with us anymore, Phil Easton, who was he was a Liverpool fan, but he was a DJ. And he was kind of doing some presenting, so he was around. And would you believe, on my sports team at Radio City at the time was Richard Quays, but Richard wasn't there. Richard had done Rotterdam 2 weeks earlier, and we brought the guy who was in the studio, a guy called Richard Jardine, who was the brother of Tony Jardine, who did some F1 later, and he was there, but he was a real rookie. And you know, we were dealing with the sort of information coming. You can imagine in 1985, you're not looking at your phone. to see the latest news. You're just hearing things. And eventually I said, look, Phil, you take over, the presenter. I'll go and see what I can find. And I went down, and I mean, this is, again, 1985. It could have been 1885, really, because underneath the stands, there was just mayhem. There were ambulances and there were police, but there was nobody cordoning off anybody to stop them going. You just kind of walk through. There's like a scene from a movie. And suddenly I just looked and I saw somebody carrying a stretcher, and there were these sort of archways underneath the stadium. And this body was just put down, but it didn't go on the floor. It went on top. Yeah, of some more. And I'd never seen a dead body in my life before. And I'm looking at about 20. And so how did I deal with it? I've no idea, except that I went back up the stairs and, you know, Phil said, what's going on? I just described what I'd seen. And a really weird thing happened that a couple of mates of mine who I managed to get some tickets for came, like, were waving to us. We could see them. They were actually in the main stand. They'd found their way into the main stand. And this guy, Tony, said, I'm going back to the hotel. It's mayhem. So I kind of stopped and went over and said, what is it? And he told me. He told me everything that happened. He'd been in the Liverpool fans and he described the whole thing. And then you've got one eyewitness. I mean, it's not really journalism, to be honest. But I went back and, yeah, started to report. And I finished my piece by saying, and if Tony Bilsborough's wife is listening, him and his father are fine, and they're going back to the hotel. And I just wish I could tell every family waiting in Liverpool the same thing. Now, yeah, it got worse and worse as the night went on, but I can't give you any lessons from that night, because there's no point in you going to cover Salford City next week and you know, preparing yourself for the possibility that there's going to be some terrible human tragedy. But I do think, without trying to sell, you know, Taylor's fare to you, that if you engage yourself in training yourself to be a journalist and asking the right questions in the right order and remaining objective and trying to be devil's advocate and trying to check things and seeking accuracy, seeking context, then it should equip you to deal with pretty much anything that comes your way. But yeah, I just hope that none of you ever have to go through that. I never called a goalkeeping error a disaster or a tragedy from that point onwards. People die in disasters and tragedies. Loris Karius letting the ball slip through his hands is not a tragedy.